Okay, let's start with seven realities. Mama, are you comfortable reading?
Okay.
Sure, thank you. Go ahead.
The seven realities: existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, or the performance of religious ceremonies and rites, but to the understanding of the following. Number one, the only real existence is that of the one and only God, who is the self in every finite self. Number two, the only real love is the love for this infinity God, which arouses an intense longing to see, know, and become one with its truth, God. The only real sacrifice is that in which, in pursuance of this love, all things, body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself are sacrificed. The only real renunciation is that which abandons, even in the midst of worldly duties, all selfish thoughts and desires. The only real knowledge is the knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and in so-called bad, in saint and in so-called sinner. This knowledge requires you to help all equally in as circumstances demand, without expectation of reward. When compelled to take part in a dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling for each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, not even those who harm you. The only real control is the discipline of the senses to abstain from indulgence in low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. The only real surrender is that in which the poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstance, and the individual, amidst every kind of hardship, is designed with the perfect calm to the will of God. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
Baba ki jai. Thank you, and welcome back, everybody. It was. I hope everybody had a good Diwali break. Indulgences of calories and maybe some beautiful visual enjoyment with all the crackers. Now it's time to get to listen humanity. So I think before we start, any comments or inputs where we are? And firstly, apologies for the messed up connectivity last Sunday. So apologies on that. I think people were not even able to reach me for a bit. Well, there's always a first. I've tried to make sure it doesn't happen for the last couple of years almost, but this was a first. Apologies. Baba should forgive me. Now, I'll tell you where we are on Listen Humanity. We started with chapter 1. There were references to the appendices, and just two appendices, I think, and both were pretty long. So after first chapter, we finished both those appendices on Saturday last. Sunday we didn't read, and now we are down to chapter 2, which is titled The First Day, and I start from there. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. The first day. At least half an hour before the appointed time, on the following morning, the honk of the blue car could be heard approaching from the direction of Ahmednagar. Caught unawares, the Sahavasis rushed to perform last-minute duties and to collect sundry garlands, presents, spectacle cases, and other valuables. A frenzy of activity could be heard through the long line of doors of the outhouses. In a moment, these were bursting open like exploding popcorn, and their occupants racing across the back lot to be at hand for the first sight of Baba. With a flourish, Meherji's red-faced driver brought the car to a halt before the great hall, and a dozen eager hands reached out to open the front door of the car. Smiling broadly, Baba stepped out, clad in spotless white from head to toe, while the back seat unloosed its content of attentive Mandali. Holding someone's face momentarily between his hands here, banging his hand warmly on a shoulder there, occasionally rearing back in surprise and grasping the arm of someone hand to elbow, Baba made his way slowly through the excited throng to the hall door. With a rapid scuffling and scraping, the motley group slid out of sandals and shoes and trod barefoot onto the closely carpeted stone floor of the hall. As if by instinct, they formed a line again before Baba's armchair, and the process of greeting the remainder of the group went on in high humor. Close to Baba and on his left, at times almost crushed by the excited crowd, stood the indefatigable Eruch. He was immaculately turned out in blue-gray cotton suiting, which was buttoned high to his chin. A black Gandhi cap perched easily on his head, and a fleck of grey in his clipped black moustache accented his quick smile and rapid translation of Baba's gestures. Further, towards the corner at Baba's left, and already taking down hurried notes on the proceedings, were two mandali of long-standing and faithful service. In the opposite corner was Baba's secretary and manager of publications, while leaning against the wall and smiling in merry delight was still another close disciple who had also preserved silence now for many years. In the general babble and confusion, Dr. Deshmukh, distinguished professor and editor of Meher Baba's discourses, slipped into the line of greeters. The action was curious, as he had been among the first to be greeted the previous afternoon. Hard on his heels was Bal Natu, also apparently bent on a second. When Deshmukh had come to the head of the line, Baba eyed him quizzically. Deshmukh, I already embraced you warmly yesterday. Yes, Baba, but I thought perhaps you would have forgotten and would greet me again today, was the unabashed reply. Eruch almost exploded with laughter as he translated Baba's reluctant reply. All right, I will greet you this once more, since it pains you so greatly to be any distance from me. Therewith, Baba drew Deshmukh over his right shoulder and then his left. As he fumbled with the elated scholar, Baba deftly swiped Deshmukh's prized fountain pen from his coat pocket. Waving it first to the side for all to see, he hid it in his own coat as he poked Deshmukh in the ribs as a warning that the second share of greetings was at an end. Both men drew back smiling in high good humor, each equally satisfied that he had outplayed the other. But it was now Bal Natu's turn to try his hand at the astute game of poker. He knew before he had to put one foot in front of the other that he was already topped. No, Bal Natu, not you too. That way I will have to embrace one and all again. As the crowd began to subside, it became clear that some of those still standing shyly in the background had never yet met Baba. One disciple of long standing came forward to handle the social amenities. Baba, these are faces which are new to you, but their devotion to you is not. He began, but Baba broke him off with a short gesture. How is it that your own voice sounds new today?" he inquired. For a moment, the able man was overcome with confusion, unprepared as he was for the sudden switch in subject matter. Then a light of comprehension broke across his face, and he smiled in recognition. "Yes, Baba. Since I saw you last, I have had some new dentures, which make me sound new also. But I am your old friend, so I will introduce my dentures to you." Thereupon, he smiled broadly and turned slowly about so that Baba and all might see these new friends. A medical practitioner from Hamirpur drew close. Baba greeted him by holding out his wrist. "Feel my pulse and tell me how you find my health," he said. After carefully reading the pulse, the physician said, "Baba, you're quite all right. In fact, you look wonderfully well." Several greetings later, Baba confronted a newcomer by drawing back in his seat and asking, "How do you think Baba looks today?" "I must say, Baba, my friends and I were just remarking how terribly tired you look. You must not do so much. You must rest more," was the frank reply. "I get ill in 5 minutes and become all right within the next 5 minutes," Baba replied, for all to hear. "In 5 minutes, I grow old, and in 5 minutes, I am young again. What sort of a disposition do I have?" None ventured to answer the question. One of the men, a young fellow with long black hair, full glossy beard, and a slender figure belying the ferocity of the framing of his face, stepped forward to introduce a friend. "Baba, this is one of my friends who was asked to come. He is not especially religious, but he wanted to come," he explained. "I am not religious either, but that is because I am the only one in the whole of creation," was Baba's reply. The asterisk points to a footnote. Similar statements are often made by Baba. The meaning is clear only if one will assume that it is possible for the individual soul to achieve union with God. In such case, the individual soul and God are one, and therefore the God realized being inevitably experiences himself as all of creation. And I go back. So the greeting went, and so it finally ended. Then Baba leaned back in his seat and looked thoughtful for a few moments. The audience cleared throats, settled into comfortable cross-legged positions, exchanged hurried last-minute greetings with neighbors, and did all the unaccountable small noisy things which must precede a public address. I hope you have all now read the instructions for the Sahvas program, which are posted in 5 languages at the rear of the room, Baba stated. If you have not, then later this morning, be sure to read them. If you're unable to read them, have someone read them to you. Just as a thought, we finished that as the first appendix. We've read it because there was a reference in chapter 1 as well. I continue. Again, there was a moment's pause while Baba shifted in his seat, blinked his eyes as if they were smarting, and wiggled the fingers of his right hand in momentary abstraction. Another small flurry of coughs, sneezes, and whispers broke out from the audience. I have not asked you to come here for long discourses on philosophical subjects, Baba resumed his gestures as Eruch translated. A proper Sahvas means physical proximity as well as mingling together as do the members of one family. But my staying with you and your staying with me do not mean the same thing. For ages and ages, I have been with you, nearer to you than you feel yourself to be. Now you have an opportunity to be with me for a week and also to come nearer and nearer to me for all time. During these 7 days, I want you all to live with me as freely and intimately as the resident Mandali have done for years together. On my part, I will be equally free and frank with you in all respects. But do not anticipate hearing only pleasant things from me. As the elder in the family, I may find fault with you and scold you. During this precious week, try at least to forget everything else so that your hearts will remain clean and open for me to step in. Do not notice either your feelings, weaknesses, and shortcomings, or your prestige, position, learning, and so-called knowledge of spiritual things. Try to forget what you think you already know. Let the atmosphere you have left behind remain there. You are now here physically. Try to remain here mentally as well. Follow me wherever I may be. Otherwise, though present here physically, you will remain mentally in your same old atmosphere. To have a passing thought and to keep thinking of it are two different things. If you fold your hands mechanically before me, but go on thinking of your problems at home, you will be folding your hands to them and not to me. Do not worry about thoughts. Never try to force your mind to check your thoughts. Thoughts may and will come. Do not try either to invite them or to drive them away. Let the thoughts come and go unasked. By observing the most minute details about me and what I do and say, you will take little notice of your thoughts, good or bad. There's an asterisk, so I go to the footnote. The first footnote here. To the student of Eastern thought, such instructions represent a necessary technique of removing the focus of attention from the self. Needless to say, the results produced are in direct relation to the caliber of the teacher and the honest wholeheartedness of the student who employs the technique. Cough, cough. Applies to us as well. With that, I go to the second paragraph. Be careful of your health and keep fit. The moment you feel indisposed, do not hesitate to consult Doctors Neelu and Kanak Dandi. Those who are used to homeopathic treatment should go to Padri. But for those who are suffering from the malady of love, I remain their doctor. At the first sign of a cold, get immediate treatment. Otherwise, all of you will catch cold and start a chorus of sneezing. With such powerful thought suggestion at work, the audience broke out into a chorus of self-conscious coughs and clearing of throats. Baba looked carefully and critically at his flock. The most important things, he resumed, which you have to forget for the time being are the troubles in your day-to-day life at home, such as health, money, social matters, and other petty worries. Do not think that by coming here, your day-to-day difficulties will be necessarily be solved. And do not expect my blessings for health or wealth. I hold no key to such problems. I am not a yogi, wali, or saint who can and does perform miracles. If you count upon such things from me in return for your sahvas with me, you may lose even what you now possess. I have not come amongst you for you to bow down to me, to perform my arti, song in praise, to worship me. These things are good for the saints, valis, and yogis. I expect much more from you. I have come to receive your love from you and to bestow my love on you. I have descended to your level for the one purpose of bestowing my love on you so that you may love God and become God. Take the footnote. Not specifically directed towards this particular audience, but in the sense of God descending into human form for the benefit of all mankind. The very thorny subject of Baba's Christhood, avatarhood, is treated at length in part 3. So again, Don is being mildly provocative here. So he says it's a very thorny subject, like he was in the introduction and foreword. Now he's again saying very thorny subject, and that's 6 sections in the book. The third is just about avatarhood. So looking forward to getting that. I continue now. Is there any questions or a pause required, or we can keep going? Any questions, thoughts, insights? I'm pausing much lesser. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. I have made markings on some of the sentences as you have read through. So if you allow me, I can repeat them.
Sure. So I can bring them up if you give me page references.
Page, okay. Just wait. Page 11.
Okay.
Last but one paragraph.
Yeah.
I am not religious either, but that is because I am the only one in the whole creation, was Baba's reply. So this is a profound sentence. We need to think of this, maybe discuss also. The other one.
Yeah.
Next page.
You want to discuss this before going ahead? Maybe we'll discuss this. Then go. Yeah.
Any inputs from anyone? I am not religious either, but that is because I am the only one in the creation.
So this is a footnoted footnoted point.
Yes,
so I'll read out the footnote as well. Similar statements are often made by Baba. The meaning is clear only if one will assume that it is possible for the individual soul to achieve union with God. In such case, the individual soul and God are one, and therefore the God realized being inevitably experiences himself as all of creation.
So the connotation here is also religious means it becomes groups. It is multiple, and in the multiple there are restricted groupings also. So religious religion is sort of a restrictive force than for the spiritual aspirant. So we need to go beyond religion. That is also say projected here. I think so.
Yeah, that's a good point in the sense that it's a journey, and then once you are in a spiritual aspirant, religion has much lesser relevance. In fact, I would even say is a hindrance rather than relevance. But then, yeah. Any other points on this? Yes.
Jai Baba.
Meeraji.
So in all these sentences, there is only one. There is no duality. Religions, when we talk about 1, 2 different religions, then there's duality. So Baba says there's only one energy, that is him, and therefore there is nothing else. So in all these sentences, the main center theme is there's only one central energy which is within all of us or within the other religions. So dividing lines through religion, this and that, does not in actuality exist. Jai Baba, that's all I understood.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Any others?
Okay.
Then next reference, Mama.
Next page, page 12, third paragraph.
Okay.
The second sentence, but my staying with you and your staying with me do not mean the same thing. The ages and ages I have been with you, nearer to you than you feel yourself to be. Now you have an opportunity to be with me for a week and also to come nearer and nearer to me for all time. This is also a profound sentence. Brings in ages into a Sahava's meeting also. And how to be nearer with Baba, or what is being nearer with Baba.
Very true. Also makes you feel bad about missing it, huh?
Yes.
That is the common theme of Listen Humanity. Each paragraph he visualizes it so powerfully, and at the same time your heart goes, hey, wish I was there. Right.
And the next but one paragraph, first sentence, during this precious week, try at least to forget everything else so that your heart will remain clean and open for me to step in. He is telling that he is ready to step in. The only thing is we have to open our hearts and keep it always open.
Yep.
Next page.
Sure.
Second paragraph, last sentence. But for those who are suffering from the malady of love, I remain their doctor. Why he calls it as a malady of love?
That's a good question.
Love always say the shade of love is always some sort of a longing, suffering. So because you would like to be with the beloved, and there are a lot of obstacles, so you try to surmount that. So suffering from the malady of love. But for those who are suffering from the malady of love means those who are longing to be with the beloved. I remain their doctor. Okay, that is how I felt when you read that.
Good point.
And last two paragraphs of the same page. I hold no key to such problems. The problems are projected on top. I am not a yogi, wali, or saint who can perform miracles. If you count upon such things for me to return to your from me in return for your sahwas with me, you may lose even what you now possess. So this is a clear warning that Baba is not going to bestow anything on material plane. So he is there only for us to derive the love and enlightenment in the spiritual plane and nothing else apart from that. So if you are interested in those, maybe to an extent, Walis, yogis and saints may bestow something. That's a clear projection of what we need to understand. So I never beg anything material from Baba.
Super.
Next line. I have not come amongst you for you to bow down to me, to perform my arti, song and praise, to worship me. These things are good for the saints, Valis and yogis. I expect much more from you. I have come to receive your love from you and to bestow my love on you. I have descended to your level for the one purpose of bestowing my love on you so that you may love God and become God. That's a profound sentence. So it is all love that is between Baba and us. So that we have to clearly understand.
We have to open our hearts.
Yes.
And not expect anything in the material realm, and give love, and in exchange get love from him.
Yes.
It's his grace.
Thank you. That is the that much I had made marked it.
Nice. Any other thoughts from anybody else? Good. So if there's nothing, I'll continue. So I'm continuing from the last two words in page 13 and then going to 14. The rest is an illusion. The rest is all illusion. Do not expect anything from me except my love for you. Let us not hurry. Let us go slowly. You have full 5 days here. Whether a point sounds small or big, be equally attentive. I may crack jokes. I may be serious. Listening to me will never be in vain. If you cannot grasp what I say, listen carefully regardless. Today or tomorrow, you will grasp everything that I say. Let's see the footnote for the 5 days. Each language group was officially assigned a week, but allowing time for arriving and settling down and packing and leaving at the end of the sessions, plus a day for the workers to clean between groups. The actual time with Baba amounted to about 5 days for each group. I go back to the para. Age after age, I have the one same thing to tell, but each time I say it in a different manner and from a different viewpoint. Do not worry when you cannot follow what I say. Merely listening may possibly help someone to love me. Those who feel drowsy and are inclined to take a nap should move back towards the walls. Only those who feel alert should sit near me. And then, thoughtfully, almost with a trace of sadness, people generally remain indifferent when I am present among them. They understand and appreciate me more after I drop my body. That is the way whenever I come. Whether moved by Baba's statement or by the need to relax muscles held too long in unused positions, several older men in front began to shift their positions with a self-conscious, apologetic air. Baba noted this at once. Those who feel like straightening their legs should do so without any hesitation. We are here in each other's company. Remain at ease and do not become unnecessarily cramped through formality. Now we will have a game of 7 tiles, he announced unexpectedly, and with a loud shout of enthusiasm, everyone poured out of the back door of the hall and onto the veranda. Baba quickly designated 2 teams of 7 men each. A small heap of tiles was stacked in the middle of the floor, and the 2 sides ranged at either end of the veranda with spectators standing off on the ground at the side. In playing 7 tiles, the in team pitches at the tiles, perhaps 15 feet away, with a tennis ball. The out team tries to catch the ball before it has touched the floor for a second time. To tumble the tiles is a score for the in team. To catch the ball before a second bound puts the pitcher out of the running. But when the out man returns the ball to the pitcher, if he fails to make the ball bounce before it is caught, all of the caught-out pitchers are in the game again. This last point is the real source of the game, for there is an almost insuperable instinct among ball players to lob a ball directly to the waiting catchers rather than to bounce it to them. One of the teams had several frisky members from the universities in Pune and Bombay. One of these students with dark hair and a small black mustache and the devil in his eye had an uncanny ability to catch the opposing team's pitched balls before they second bounce. On the other hand, another member of his team with great craggy features and the build of a football tackle could pitch with a sizzle that almost defied catching. Between the two of them, and with not inconsiderable support from their teammates, they were licking the tar out of the opposition. The underdog team was up with 2 pitchers left and still without a hit in the entire game. One of their 2 remaining pitchers looked warily at the tiles, and his grinning opposition wound up and let fly. He was caught cleanly and easily out by the devilish one. As the latter lazily tossed the ball back, a snowy arm reached out from nowhere and snatched it in midair. With a casual swing, Baba tossed the ball onto the startled pitcher, and with a wild cheer from the audience, all of the caught-out pitchers rejoined the fray. The precedent having been established, and the mob response having sanctioned it, 3 times the arm reached out from a jabbering knot of spectators and saved the weaker team on the verge of catastrophe. But finally, Baba would save them no longer. It was Deshmukh's turn to pitch, and his ball was wide and slow. He was out. Deshmukh, for you we have half the distance, Baba gestured, and moved Deshmukh halfway to the pile of tiles. Deshmukh smiled in nervous embarrassment, pitched, and missed by a wider margin than before. Again, Baba moved him a foot or 2 closer. Again, the tense Deshmukh pitched, and it seemed that certainly the tiles must have skipped out of the way, for again they escaped at point-blank range. A final time, Baba moved Deshmukh closer until he seemed more a bombardier sighting vertically on his target. Incredible, he missed again. Baba threw up his arms, walking off in sign that the game was done. As the group came back into the hall, a few late arrivals were waiting to greet Baba. One smiling Sehwasi came forward with a garland so large that he had difficulty unsorting himself from it. Baba chuckled as he saw the mass of confusion approaching him. What price did you pay for the great bulk of flowers? He asked. 10 rupees was the prompt reply, at which a shout of laughter went up. Another approaching supplicant needed an entire basket to carry his tribute of flowers. As he struggled up to the chair, Baba remarked on his sallow complexion. You seem to be pulled down. Perhaps it is your love for me that makes your face look wan and withered. Then one who had traveled several times with Baba on his strenuous journeys, contacting the musts or spiritually intoxicated, approached to pay his respects. There is a footnote on spiritually intoxicated. See the Wayfarers from William Donkin. That was referred to in chapter 1 as well, if you recollect. And I continue. Are you happy? Baba asked. You look just the same as when I saw you last. The old friend nodded smilingly to acknowledge his health, the greeting and his appreciation of Baba's concern. Then he turned to go away. Wait, did you garland me? Baba asked, as if there was some real doubt in his mind. No, Baba, I did not. You must also garland me, Baba signified by gestures as he removed one of the many strands of flowers from his neck and handed it to the waiting man. As the crowd settled on their haunches on the mat-covered floor, Baba sat back in his seat momentarily. Then he focused his attention on the group and began to gesture as Eruch translated. To garland me, to bow down to me, and to sing my praises are comparatively the three most unimportant things. The three most important things on the path to God realization are love, obedience, and surrender. There is no possibility of compromise about these three. Love is a gift from God to man. Obedience is a gift from master to man. And surrender is a gift from man to master. The one who loves desires to do the will of the beloved and seeks union with the beloved. Obedience performs the will of the beloved and seeks the pleasure of the beloved. Surrender resigns to the will of the beloved and seeks nothing. And this is a beautiful paragraph when I think I'd read it again. Love is a gift from God to man. Obedience is a gift from master to man. And surrender is a gift from man to master. The one who loves desires to do the will of the beloved and seeks union with the beloved. Obedience performs the will of the beloved and seeks the pleasure of the beloved. Surrender resigns to the will of the beloved and seeks nothing. One who loves is the lover of the beloved. One who obeys is the beloved of the beloved. One who surrenders all, body, mind, and all else, has no existence other than that of the beloved, who alone exists in him. Therefore, greater than love is obedience, and greater than obedience is surrender. And yet, as words, all three can be summed up in one phrase: love divine. I'll pause here if there are any questions or comments.
This is the first time we get a clarity on, because all three seem to be almost similar to us. Obedience, surrender seem to be almost the same. Here Baba is clearly giving the difference between them and the gradation also. So surrender is resigned to the will of the beloved and seek nothing. Whereas a step above that, obedience performs the will of the beloved and seeks the pleasure of the beloved. So we seek the pleasure of the beloved. There is some say some difference between you and the beloved here. And love is the gift of the God to man. Obedience is gift from master to man. Surrender is gift from man to master. Love is the gift of God, gift from God to man. Obedience is the gift from master to man. So I didn't understand. Obedience is gift from master to man. Can anyone explain what does that mean? I thought obedience is the thing from man to master, but here it is mentioned as obedience is gift from master to man.
Only when Baba puts that seed in you, that you completely surrender onto him and you are obedient.
Okay.
So it all has to start from him. We are just mere elements of a combination of 5 elements. So his will in our heart to obey him, that ignites us and allows us completely surrender, and therefore everything originates from him.
Yes.
And we just follow. Jai Baba.
Yes, your idea very clearly enunciates that if we think obedience is from man to master, there is an element of ego that also is
Yes.
removed.
Correct.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Jai Baba.
Jai
So
Baba,
in
to
that
what
sense, yeah, Kama, go ahead.
Romita, she said it very perfectly, that we know that now everybody says, I'm a Baba lover. Like, what do you mean by that? So different aspirants love Baba in their own way. And Baba has also given us the different awakenings through My Wish and How to Love God and Prayer of Repentance, where loving God is about the way we relate with people, animate and inanimate things. So love is all about relationships, and is the relationship with is relative or absolute. So when Baba says that the gift that he gives us to love him is an absolute kind of thing, not relative. When we say we are loving Baba and if we don't have the gift of pure love, that is very a relative form. So obedience, as rightly said, you can't be obedient to Baba unless he gives us the grace. So as Namita rightly pointed out, everything originates from him, but we also have to make that effort. Baba says, you take one step, I'll take 99 steps. So that effort is also very important from our side, because things are not going to happen by itself. And we would also know previously, as we have read in Gift of Pure Love, we need to imbibe certain spiritual attributes, which is going to take effort, like no backbiting, looking at the good points of others, supreme tolerance and the happiness of others, and not to worry. So these things we have to imbibe these qualities and then wait patiently, intense effort and infinite patience. And one day it will happen, like winning the lottery ticket. Jai Baba.
Okay. So I'll continue. One can find volumes and volumes of prose and poetry about love, but there are very few persons who have found love and experienced it. No amount of reading, listening, and learning can ever tell you what love is. Regardless of how much I explain love to you, you will understand it less and less if you think you can grasp it through the intellect or imagination. Hafiz describes the bare truth about love when he says, Janabe Ishkra Darga Basi Bala Tar Azak Ast Kasi in Astan Busad ke Jan Der Astin Darad. He translates, the majesty of love lies far beyond the reach of intellect. Only one who has his life up his sleeve dares kiss the threshold of love. I repeat, the majesty of love lies far beyond the reach of intellect. Only one who has his life up his sleeve dares kiss the threshold of love. The difference between love and intellect is something like that between night and day. They exist in relation to one another and yet as two different things. Love is real intelligence capable of realizing truth. Intellect is best suited to know all about duality, which is born of ignorance and is entirely ignorance. When the sun rises, night is transformed into day. Just so, when love manifests, not knowing, that is ignorance, is turned into conscious knowing, which is knowledge. In spite of the difference between a keenly intelligent person and a very intelligent person, very unintelligent person, each is equally capable of experiencing love. The quality which determines one's capacity for love is not one's wit or wisdom, but one's readiness to lay down life itself for the beloved and yet remain alive. One must, so to speak, slow off body, energy, mind, and all else, and become dust under the feet of the beloved. This dust of a lover who cannot remain alive without God, just as an ordinary man cannot live without breath, is then transformed into the beloved. Thus, man becomes God. At this, Baba stopped briefly and looked around at the intently listening audience. Then he plunged ahead more pointedly. Listen to love without philosophizing about it. None present here loves me as I ought to be loved. If all of you had such love, none of you would be left before me. You would all have realized God, and we would all have become the one which we all are in reality and in eternity. You accept me as being simultaneously God and man, the highest of the high and the lowest of the low. But by accepting me to be that, you do not know me to be that. To know me as I am, you must become conscious of my real state, and for that, you must love me as I love you. The Mandali, who have been with me through thick and thin all these years, are fully prepared for love of me to lay down their very lives at such a sign from me. Yet, even they do not love me as I love them. If they did, then they would have become one with my oneness, which in reality is the oneness of us all. It is love alone which can lift the veil between a lover and the beloved. Believe me, you and I remain divided by nothing but the veil of you, yourself. What does you yourself mean? When you feel hungry, you say, I am hungry. If unwell, you say, I am not well. When you say, Baba, I slept well, I am happy, my son died, they abused me, I feel miserable, those things are mine. It is this I, me, and mine, which is the veil. It is only because of the veil of the false ego lying between us that you find yourselves involved in so many difficulties, troubles, and worries, all of which disappear automatically when touched by the reality of love. When the curtain of your limited eye is lifted, and it can only disappear through love and love alone, you realize unity and find me as your real self, that is God. I say so because it is only I everywhere. There is really nothing like you. It requires cycles and cycles for one to be enlightened with real knowledge of self or God. Therefore, millions upon millions of so-called births and deaths on your part are not sufficient in themselves to lift the veil of your limited eye. It can be removed through love, though in infinitely less than a split second. All those who are true ascetics, yogis, valis, peers, and saints are not necessarily God realized. Only real lovers of God, irrespective of sex, are the true Mardaan-e-Khuda, men of God. Even among 100,000 such men of God, though perhaps only one will become God realized after many cycles. Both Hakim Sanai and Maulana Rumi say the same thing in different words. Daor ha bayad Keta yak mard, sahib dil shawad. And Salha Mardan, Burdand Inteza, Ta Yakira Barshut Az Sad Hazar. That is, it needs many cycles for just one advanced soul to be realized. When for many years man has longed for God realization, 1 out of 100,000 such men of God achieves it. No amount of rites, rituals, ceremonies, worship, meditation, penance, and remembrance can produce love in themselves. None of these are necessarily a sign of love. On the contrary, those who sigh loudly and weep and wail have yet to experience love. Love sets on fire the one who finds it. At the same time, it seals his lips so that no smoke comes out. Love is meant to be experienced and not disclosed. What is displayed is not love. Love is a secret, to remain a secret save for the one who receives it and keeps it. To love Baba in hopes of achieving health, wealth, betterment of family and friends, etc., is to love all these and not Baba. Such love cannot be compared with that of Adi and his wife, Rhoda Dubash, and Nariman and Navrozi, Dada Chandji, and their family members. They can be justly proud of their love for me, which remained unshaken in the face of tragic accidents which cost the lives of their dear ones among my dear ones. As a matter of fact, Nozer, Dada Chandji, has come to me as all those who do remember me while breathing their last. Footnote, Baba tells the story of Nozer later in the week. Love God and become God. I have come to receive your love and to give you mine, as I have already said. If you love me, you will find me. Unless you love me, you can never find me. Do not think that you can never love me or that you can find no time to love me. I often say that I want your love. I mean it, because that is all that I want from you. Therefore, I always tell you to love me more and more. I have also said that you cannot love me as I ought to be loved. To do that, you must first receive the gift of my love, and that gift depends upon absolute pleasure on my part in giving you just a glimpse of the reality of myself. No one can possess love by any means other than as a gift, but I give love to self and accept it myself. The giving of love knows no law save love, which by itself is the law which governs all other laws of nature. It is always infinitely easy for me to give, but it is not always equally easy for you to receive the gift of my love. Baba paused once again, and his eyes moved over the faces turned patiently, quietly, even sadly towards him. Not one visage in the room indicated that the thinking, feeling, aspiring man behind it interpreted the Master's words in any manner other than he intended them. That the great goal of each human being is the realization of his own oneness with God, and that there can be no greater, no more necessary boon in achieving this goal than the love and the grace of a perfect being who is already one with God. Sometimes it is also infinitely impossible for one to receive that love. Erich interpreted Baba's wide, sweeping gestures as he continued his intense preoccupation with the subject. That is why Kabir says that some ask for it and do not get it, some get it unasked, and yet there are those who are unable to receive it even when it is offered to them. I'm ever prepared to give the gift, but you must also prepare yourself to receive it. That requires real daring. Even in ordinary animal and human love, there are upper reaches in which a mother is sometimes negligent of her own life for the sake of her offspring. Or a man can remain without sleep or food or thoughts of lust for days due to his restlessness, born of true love for a woman. Divine love is the fire which not only eliminates all kinds of cold, but also all sorts of imagined heat. For example, among the very, very few who possess such love is the mast known as Dondiba at Kolhapur. Though exposed to the rigors of heat, cold, and rain through all seasons, his body remains healthy, well fleshed, and strong. The fire is burning within him, unknown even to those in his surroundings. His mind has no link with his body. Love pervades him from head to foot. Although there's a footnote on the must, as must is spiritually preoccupied and divinely intoxicated person. I continue with second para. Although love is beyond intellect, there are innumerable points about it which can still be explained by reason and brought within its grasp. But in finality, I remain. Everything else is zero, and I am the only reality. And there's a footnote, let's see it right away. Not in the sense of Meher Baba as a person, but as the one who is one with God. Baba's constant theme is that all men are really one with God and therefore inevitably one with all God-realized beings and with each other as well as if they only knew it. I say all this as much to those who have been living with me. Actually, I should continue from here. Sorry. That reality cannot be reached in illusion, through illusions, and there can be no hide and seek about love. When God becomes man, Avatar, Buddha, Christ, Rasul, he can bestow both love and obedience upon and accept the surrenderance of any and all individuals. I say all this as much to those who have been living with or for me all these years, as to those who are only with me now for this Sahwas. I tell you honestly that if you obey me honestly, you will become me, your own real self. This is not the first time I have said this. For ages past, I have been telling all to leave everything and to follow me. That means to obey me so that you may have conscious experience of me. Now is the time when those who obey me will realize me. Obedience, which is greater than love, is the 100% obedience described by Hafiz. Mazan ze chuno chara, dam ke banda e mukbil. Bejan kubul kunad, her sukan ke sultan guft. Broadly translated, this means carry out every command of the master without question, as is becoming to a lucky slave. About 30 years ago, before I started observing my silence, And when Mehrabad was a colony of hundreds of seekers, servers, and sufferers who lived in the ashrams, abodes, asylums, shelters, schools, dispensaries, and the hospital here at that time, a visitor came to surrender to me. He could not help weeping when I told him that what he intended was very, very difficult, since surrenderance means obedience, and obedience has but one meaning, and that is to obey. He said he knew that and was prepared to obey me implicitly. When I inquired if he would cut his own child to pieces if I asked him to do so, he even agreed to that. But when I asked him to remove his clothes and walk about naked in the streets of Ahmednagar, he began to protest and ultimately went his way. I'm not going to ask you to do that, Baba hastened to tell the audience. I never expect anyone to do the impossible. Chuckles of understanding greeted this comment. A reshuffling of cramped limbs took place as a small buzz of background conversation vented the feeling of a number of individuals to their neighbors that there was not much purpose in seeking a great master if the aspirant could not face even such a first test as this. Baba's smile faded and he began to look serious again. Now that you are in my Sahvas, you should know all about my habits and about my behavior to the Mandali who live with me. I love Kaikobad, one of the resident Mandali, and often bow down to him. Whenever I go out on must tours or for other congregations, I ask Kaikobad to lay his hand on my head and bless me. Recently, at Satara, he wept and protested. I told him to continue to obey me to the point of kicking me should I ask him to do so. Kaikobad has been with me for 12 years. He has his family. They're staying on Mehrabad Hill. He has dedicated everything to me and I have accepted him. He belongs to the Parsi, Zoroastrian, priest class. And hence he is also called Dastur, which means a priest. And he is a real priest. He sees Baba as Baba is to be seen. And he takes Baba's blessings as blessings are to be taken. This is about Mehrabad Hill, a separate group of buildings about 1/2 mile from the collection in which the Sahvas programs were being held. During this time, they were occupied in addition to the staff by Francis Brabazon, the distinguished Australian poet, and the narrator, who were the only Occidentals present at the Sahvas programs. I continue. He has also been silently repeating Baba's name 100,000 times every 24 hours all these years. He had the first glimpse of divinity at Mehrabad in 1946. Again, on August 31, 1953, he experienced at Dehradun such bliss that he was on the point of dropping his body. Now he says he can see glimpses of my reality whenever he wishes. At such moments, he sees even a dark room lit up with such brilliance that compared with it, the brilliance of the sun is nothing. Then, in that light, he sees me. That is no miracle performed by me. I cannot do that myself. I know only one thing, that I am everywhere and in everything. Despite all that, Kaikobad has yet to realize God. He is on the path and he has to go on and on. He often tells me that he is enjoying my grace, and I always tell him, and I mean it, that it is his love for me that gives him the wonderful experiences of the path. Even though glimpses His experiences give him deep bliss and the unshakable conviction that I am his master. Therefore, he will carry out any of my orders promptly and cheerfully. Kaikobad, Baba gestured as he looked towards the back of the audience. Stand up. A slim, gentle-faced man stood up about 2/3 of the way back in the hall. Is not what I have said true? Baba queried. Yes, Baba, everything you have said is exactly true, Kaikobad replied, and looking for a moment at Baba to see if anything further was demanded of him, he sat down again. Whatever I say, Baba resumed, I say it in all sincerity. Unquestioning obedience to me, without consciously knowing me, will bring you nearest to me. But it is impossible to obey me literally and spontaneously. If I were in your place, I myself would not be able to do that. The best thing for you would be to obey me cheerfully. In any case, though, to obey me now when you have not yet consciously experienced my greatness is in itself a great thing. Much of the value of obedience is lost once conviction is transformed into actual conscious knowledge of my reality. That is the purpose for which you have been called. I pause here if there are any comments, questions, and then we can continue. Looks like there are none.
No,
continue.
The whole passage is so dense. It needs a lot of repeated readings and then thinking over. So this is more than discourses.
Yes. Any specific lines that you want to go over? Any markings that you'd like to discuss? Okay, so if there is none, let me continue. Obedience is greater than all the spiritual experiences, but obedience for show is worse than no obedience. Even if one among you succeeds in loving me and obeying me, even fully served. Otherwise, instead of my sahvas, you will have enjoyed a week's picnic. Now it is time for you all to have your midday meal. Eat well, rest after lunch, and all be here at 2 o'clock. Baba rose from his chair and strode at once from the hall and out into a small separate hut, which had been fitted up with a small couch and a few toilet articles for his use. The busily chattering throng remained in the hall, swirled into small knots, large knots, dreamily moving individuals intent on not talking, and a few who instantly set off about their business. Soon the hall began to empty as nature added its reminder to Baba's injunction to eat. At last, the only muffled clatter and laughter of scores of light-hearted persons eating and joking could be heard. Even in late fall and winter, this was Friday, November 4th, 1955, a brief rest in the heat of the day feels good in this part of India, although its greater altitude and scant rainfall lessen the discomfort experienced in the lower coastal areas. The excitement of being with Baba was not enough to keep more than a handful of the Sahvasis from relaxing and taking a brief nap after lunch. Long before the designated time, However, the majority were back on their feet and awaiting Baba's return. Soon, the nature of that afternoon's agenda became apparent. A large tent had been erected some days previously at the front and to the right of the Great Hall. It was open on two sides and closed to the rear towards Arangaon and to the west. Its dirt floor was well covered with carpets and liberally sprinkled with cushions. At the enclosed end had been built a low platform, and on this was placed more carpeting and a chaise lounge. In and around this tent began to accumulate a motley collection of villagers from Arangaon. Here, Baba was to receive the families of the small army of workers required to staff Mehrabad for the Sehwas programs. Most of these people had grown up in Baba's aura, as the 4 decades of his work had often centered at Mehrabad. To these villagers, he was more than a religious figure, for that would have commanded only veneration and a shyness born of awe. Each time Baba's car paused briefly at the railroad tracks when driving between the Sehwas headquarters and Mehrabad on the hill, or slowed down to negotiate a hairpin turn on the dirt road near the village, scores of delighted children and mothers, clasping their inevitable infant to their shoulders, reached out with shouts to touch the car or even the man himself. This was a person they loved. Now, many of them were to have the rare privilege of passing singly in front of him, act by him, even touched by him. The almost ecstatic veneration of the Indian for his religious master is something foreign to Western life. Inevitably, in all of part, even all of the self. To the Occidentals, this appears dangerous and is often practiced without its dangers. Regardless, the Indian feels instinctively accomplish it.
Karthik, your voice is breaking. You're unable to hear.
Uh-oh. 1 second. Just give me 1 second. Let me just. Is it okay now or still bad? Hello.
Okay. Okay.
So okay now. It's okay now.
Okay. I don't know. I've been having weeks of issues with Airtel. This is where we were. These people of Arangaon, simple, poor, sometimes uncouth, often tattered, collected in the tent in anticipation of a high point in their daily life. Many of the small children were clothed only to their navel, and gaping holes in clothing often rendered questionable any real contribution either towards protection or modesty. But they were in their very best and their cleanest, and they had scrubbed their bodies and faces. The tent filled tighter and tighter. People began to spill up along the sides and over onto the front veranda of the hall, and even into the sun beyond the shadow of the tent. Each worker at Mehrabad must have discovered that day that he had close relatives whose ties of blood he had never suspected before. A small chorus of male adults and boys began to sing to the accompaniments of bells. The air grew tense in anticipation. At the extreme far corner of the tent, a magnificent appearing Hindu woman appeared with several young girls who were apparently in her care. This was Godavari Mai, beautiful, gentle, shy, the chosen disciple of the late great Hindu perfect master Upasani Maharaj now administering his ashram at Sakori. As the singing voices wove in and out of the complex tonal system of Indian music and the bells jingled even more insistently, Baba appeared at one end of the tent and made his way with characteristic speed to the platform. Hands were stretched up to him as he passed. A swirl of villagers threatened to draw him in like an undertow and would have absorbed him but for the firm action of his mandali. Erich bawled out orders in the local vernacular, Marathi, and a long line of women and very young children formed to Baba's left along one side of the tent. This was the receiving line, and no king receiving his court ever had more excited attention. Before the line started to pass in front of him, however, Baba invited Godavari Mai to sit with him on the platform and her girls to stand at his side to the rear. As Godavari Mai took her place at Baba's side, a sense of magnificent spirit passed between these two people and swept out and over the rapt audience. No words record the air of peace, beauty, devotion, and regard which thundered in complete silence between these two. Why try? Words break their backs in trying to carry the slightest part of the load, describing what occurred that warm afternoon under the tent near Ahmednagar. Black faces, dark faces, light faces. Everywhere, the great round brown eyes of the Indian woman, so startling in their size and their framing of long black lashes and pale.
Karthik, we lost you.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me now? Check.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, is it a problem for everybody? Because my network seems to be okay on my side. Can the others hear me, please? Can someone else confirm?
Yeah, that time we didn't hear you also.
You are clear, loud and
Okay.
clear.
Now it's
Now it's
fine.
okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. The closer to horizontal, the closer to expression of one's feeling of veneration. But this could not be, for Baba had long ago declared that greetings should be given upright, a function of the heart, of feeling, not horizontal. This was the one point of true confusion in a vast mass of physical confusion, with straining Mandali trying mightily to keep the pressing, eager crowd in line. Before each villager was to greet Baba, she was reminded that she was not to bow down nor prostrate herself, nor try to touch her forehead to his feet, those age-old symbols of veneration for the royalty of heaven. Yet, as each woman found herself actually in the presence of this deeply loved man, she became unstrung and instinct took over. Finally, the Mandali gave up trying to keep the woman upright and contented themselves with preserving order in the excited line. At last, the women and girls and small children had passed, and it was the turn of the old men, and then of the stripling boys, and finally of the workers themselves. And then it was done, and the villagers returned to their homes, and Godavari Mai and the girls left for Sakori, and Baba drove off to Mehrazad near Pimplegaon. There was a beautiful sunset that night. The loosely scattered clouds scattered back to earth the pinks and the scarlets and the purples for more than 2 hours in a colored symphonic postlude. The night crept on. The lights winked on at the Sehbaz quarters, and the lamp lighter lit the gas mantle lamps at Mehrabad on the hill. Pandu, the attendant, trotted whistling up the stairs to turn down the covers on the two guest beds, and the night watchman took up his seat at the front gate and began the periodic dry cough with which he accented the night. Well, did you enjoy the day, Don? I have never known anything like it. The morning of discourses and sporadic horseplay, the afternoon of a kind and depth of human devotion I have never seen before. It's very difficult for me to comprehend it all, to be a part of it and not feel that it's happening a million miles away and I am looking at it through a giant telescope. Yes, one has that feeling a bit at first, but it wears away, and then you wonder how it is possible to live any other way. I can't help but think back to Baba's discussion of obedience, Francis. It goes so far beyond anything I've ever worked out or even speculated about that I got lost. I'll repeat that. It goes so far beyond anything I've ever worked out or even speculated about that I get lost. It is rather hard for a Westerner. Our trouble is that we have absolutely no idea of the use of obedience as a spiritual tool, at least the kind of obedience that is really important. It makes me think of a story I once read of a great king, Mahmud of Ghazni, who was also a spiritual aspirant. He had one slave, Ayaz, whom he appeared to prefer above all his great courtiers. This created some jealousy in his court, so he decided one day to demonstrate to his nobles just why he preferred this slave to all others. Mahmud had two heavy stones placed before his throne, and on one was laid the finest jewel in his possession. He asked one of his great nobles to come before him and then told him to pick up the second stone and smash it down on the jewel. The courtier was thunderstruck, and when he had recovered his speech, he began diplomatically to argue the king out of his decision. Finally, Mahmud told him to go away and called for a second great noble who was in the court. Again, the same command was given, with the same results. Once more, the king ordered the reluctant noble away and called his slave. This time, on Mahmud's order, Ayaz promptly picked up the second stone and brought it instantly smashing down on the first. The precious jewel was shattered to dust. To test Ayaz still further, Mahmud berated him soundly before the court for having destroyed the magnificent gem. Finally, after Mahmud had run out of breath, Ayaz, who had stood quietly all the time, bowed his head and said, "The fault is mine, my lord." I think that's the end of chapter 2. Ayaz also came up in our Pearl's audio files, if you remember, with the incident about obedience or surrender. The beautiful reference in a Baba story. Yeah. Any quick points before we wrap up for today? No?
No.
Too much to understand. So those of you who are reading again today and or at least listening to the audio file and you have some more questions, we could start with that tomorrow before starting chapter 3. Yeah, anything else?
Those who have not
Namita,
come
where
can-
is your